Welcome to Lead Air Sample Training and Trigger Tasks for Janus Field Personnel, presented by Michael Sharp, Senior Safety Officer of Janus Corporation. What is a cal OSHA trigger task? For lead work, all work that disturbs any amount of lead, not just lead-based paint, disposable suits, respirators, and other lead protective precautions, regulated areas, containment, hygiene facilities, hand face washing stations or showers, etc., and air samples are required. The trigger task level determines what respirator we must use to start the task. Level 1 trigger task is where lead containing, that's any level of lead, not just lead-based paints, coatings or paint are present, and we are doing either manual demolition of the structure, drywall, plaster, exterior stucco, taking things down by hand, manual scraping, or heat gun coatings removal. We don't do a lot of heat gun removal at Janus, but if we did, we could not use a heat gun above 1100 degrees. We're conducting level 1 trigger tasks, those tasks listed above, require at a minimum use of a half-face respirator with HEPA filters and hand and face washing stations. This includes all remediation and all demolition work that Janus conducts, as there is virtually no demo work that does not impact lead. Remember, even if there is no lead, there are other ingredients in paint that are bad for you. There is no dust or fume that is good for you to breathe. Level 2 trigger tasks are manual sanding, power tool cleaning with dust collection systems, local exhaust, power tool grinding with dust collection systems. Dust collection systems are local exhaust, including demo work. Power tool sanding with dust collection systems. Again, dust collection is local exhaust. Spray painting with lead paint, that's any level of lead in the paint, not just lead-based paint, and today's paint have up to 90 parts per million in them. Work conducting a level 2 trigger task requires, at a minimum, a full-face negative pressure mask with HEPA filters that has been quantitatively fit tested, that's with the port-a-count device, and hand and face washing stations. If we have air samples showing our exposure when conducting these tasks are below the action level, we can reduce our respiratory protection when we start these tasks down to a half mask. But we have to have that documentation on site for the project. Janus now owns a port-a-count fit testing machine. We can do quantitative fit testing in-house, and we'll be doing it in each office at various times throughout the year. Level 3 trigger tasks are using lead-containing mortar or lead burning, and then where lead-containing coatings or paint are present, rivet busting, power tool cleaning without dust collection systems, that's a local exhaust again, power tool grinding without the dust collection systems, power tool sanding without the dust collection systems, cleanup activities where dry expendable abrasive blasts are used, abrasive blasting enclosure movement or removal, we don't do a whole lot of those things, abrasive blasting, we don't do a lot of that, but we do some, welding, torch cutting, torch burning. Work conducting a level 3 trigger task requires use at a minimum of a full-face powered air purifying respirator with HEPA filters and showers, not just a hygiene station. Again, we can reduce the level of respiratory protection if we have air samples showing that we are below the PEL and action level for these activities. Then there's something called trigger tasks not listed. This is any work the employer has any reason to believe that an employee performing the task may be exposed to lead in excess of the PEL. This would be clean demo work because of the potential for lead to be in the paint at low levels or into ceramic tile glaze or into window glazing, any of those types of materials that typically get missed on inspections for hazardous materials. If we take air samples while doing those things, we can get down to the half mask again. Otherwise, we need to be wearing a respirator while doing these tasks, the demo tasks. This includes all demo work, even when no lead-based paint exists, because there is lead in those other materials that we just described. For instance, saw cutting painted metal door frames or even powder-coated door frames. The action level is 2 micrograms per cubic meter. Permissible exposure level is 10 micrograms per cubic meter. Our sample results for this activity, saw cutting painted metal on a project up here in Northern California, were between 11 and 17 micrograms per cubic meter of air. So we were over the PEL, we were over the action level by a great deal. This is a sample of actually scraping loose and peeling paint. That's a result of 44 micrograms per cubic meter of air. That's very high, especially for a project where we were scraping paint. We need to revise the task to include better local exhaust, more water, or something, some way to get this result down lower. We have other loosen peeling paint scrape projects where we are below the action level of 2. So something here went significantly wrong. Janus now has to consider this activity to be exposure to our people conducting paint scraping to this level of exposure until we get 2 results for samples collected at least 7 days apart below the action level of 2 micrograms per cubic meter of air. Something to think about. 44 micrograms per cubic meter of air is only 6 micrograms per cubic meter of air away from requiring showers and CDPH certification of the crew. We don't want to go there. We are also now required by 1532.1 to write a corrective action plan for this activity. Requirements for lead work until we establish our exposure assessments. Until we have air samples showing exposure below the action level, we need to do the following thing on lead removal and demolition projects, whether those demolition projects are touching paint or not. Appropriate respiratory protection. You figure the respiratory protection out by which trigger task you're doing, or if you're doing a trigger task not listed, then we use our initial air samples to determine the level of respiratory to where the rest of the time we should always start demo work on at least half masks. Okay, we have to be wearing suits and respirators. We have to have change areas. That can be a drop cloth. Hygiene facilities, hand and face washing stations, unless we're doing a level 3 trigger task or we have air samples above 50 micrograms per cubic meter of air. Those would require showers. Eating facilities or an eating area. Dedicated eating area, we're going to make sure that it doesn't become contaminated with lead. Regulated areas, that's danger signage. A blood level testing, unless workers have had a blood level test within the last 2 months. And then Cal OSHA action level training, you guys have had action level training, at least most of you had, unless exposures reach or exceed 50 micrograms per cubic meter of air, and then you need CDPH certification at that point. This is all irregardless of whether it's an RRP job. If it's an RRP job, renovation, repair, and painting job, we have to be RRP certified as well as do all of this. We want to collect air samples on every project, remediation or demo, until we have a record of which tasks we can conduct without exceeding the action level. We should collect air samples at the beginning of every different task, once a week if tasks go that long, as soon as possible if we have samples above the action level, and when necessary as noted here. Additional exposure assessments whenever there's been a change of equipment, process, control, personnel, or a new task has been initiated that may result in additional employees being exposed to lead at or above the action level, or may result in employees already exposed at or above the action level being exposed above the PEL, the employer shall conduct additional monitoring in accordance with this subsection. Basically, what this is saying is that if we can't keep our air samples below the action level, we need to take additional air samples. With asbestos samples, we have to worry about overloading samples, which means using more than one air sample cassette on projects where dust levels are higher than normal. For lead, exposure samples can be one cassette for the entire shift, or at most one for the morning shift and one for the afternoon shift. They do not need to read the lead sample filters like they do for asbestos. They use the entire filter, dissolving the entire filter into a liquid when handling lead. Just be sure the filter does not load so heavily that the liters per minute drops when collecting the sample. When collecting lead air samples, it's important to pull at least 380 liters for each sample. Otherwise, the lab can't analyze down to the action level, and therefore we get a less than result that doesn't mean we're below the action level. If we don't get at least 380 liters, then ICP analysis cannot give us a result of 2 or lower, which is the action level. If our results are not 2 micrograms per cubic meter of air or lower, it's difficult or impossible to show we were below the action level. For projects that are going to last less than a week, we want to ask for 2 or 3 day turnaround times for the samples collected on the first 2 days of the project. Samples collected after the first 2 days of the project can have a 5-day turnaround from the lab, as the project will be over before the samples will come back from the lab. On long projects, we want quick turnaround times from the lab at first, 1 or 2 day turnaround times at the lab for the first couple of days on the project. After we've established that we can control our lead exposures well, We need to collect samples just 1 or 2 days a week on various tasks, and we can have a 5-day turnaround on the samples. You may not feel like it, but this was a brief explanation of how lead air sampling should be conducted on Janus projects, unless required to be conducted differently in our project specifications. Additional air sampling issues will be discussed with management, admin, and estimators in each office. That information will include required blood testing frequency, notification to employees of elevated air sample results and blood sample results regardless of the level of lead in blood results, and other issues. Thank you for taking lead air sample training and trigger tasks for Janus personnel. If you have any questions, please contact me at either 209-993-6123 or mikes@januscorp.com.